And just like every time, if you have a question, just send me something in the chat room and I will recognize you. And Monica Miller is more than happy to have me do my interrupting thing, which I do so well. And so also keep in mind that we will also be having a special event on Tuesday. And just to reiterate, you don't have to read the full book before the special event on Tuesday. You'll learn a lot about madness in Milledgeville and Flannery O'Connor from this event. So I'm looking forward to seeing you there too. Monica Miller is the head of the Flannery O'Connor Society, and she is a professor of English at Middle Georgia State University. Did I get that right? And she has been so kind as to agree to facilitate our book sessions today at 4:30 and at 7. So Monica, why don't we let you just get started?
All right, I think y'all can hear me now. Yeah, I've really enjoyed participating in the ones that y'all have had so far too. So I just want to say thank you for that. And for those of you who have been in Middle Georgia for a while, we're now Middle Georgia State, but you may remember us as Macon State or Middle Georgia. We've had a lot, like many Georgia universities, we've had a lot of names. And when I originally talked to Irene about what I might like to talk to y'all about, that day on Facebook, somebody had said, this was, what, March, I think? Somebody had said, well, what would Flannery O'Connor advice would she have for us during a pandemic? And so that got me started thinking about, she would have a lot to talk to us about, you know. There is the famous line of hers that she said in a letter to her friend Betty Hester that there wouldn't be any biographies about her because there aren't any biographies about lives spent between the house and the chicken yard. They don't make exciting books. But, you know, a lot of us are spending our lives between the house and the chicken yard. A lot of us literally. I know plenty of people who raise chickens. I thought that there was a lot to be gleaned from reading, both thinking about her own life, and the story that I chose at that time was The Enduring Chill, which is a story that I think maybe we talk about a little bit less than some of her others from the Everything That Rises Must Converge collection. So The Enduring Chill, a story of a young man whose antipathy or even animosity towards his mother leads to him ultimately poisoning himself and damning himself to a life of confinement with his mother. And the real life roots of the story in O'Connor's life and its connection to the COVID-19 crisis, I thought were really insightful. Since we first talked about doing this though, the world has just, you know, gone even crazier than we could have ever expected. And with the historic international uprising against police brutality and race-based violence in the country, right, we're all familiar right now with the protests and the legislation and the court cases happening with regard to the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis and Breonna Taylor in Louisville and Ahmaud Arbery just today, the court case in Brunswick. And now reading The Enduring Chill got even more of a resonance for me. So I think it's really interesting to be talking about this story right now. So what I want to do is I'll start off by giving a little bit of background information about the story as we've done in the previous sessions, and talk about how I'm reading it right now, kind of in this current historical moment, and then see what y'all's thoughts are. But I'm going to copy Bruce Gentry. 2 weeks ago when he talked about Good Country People, he started by sharing a few books that have influenced his reading. And I'm going to start with, so y'all can see what Irene was talking about, Mab Seagrass' Administrations of Lunacy, which is what Tuesday night's talk is going to be about. I don't know if you can see how thick that is, but it's a really incredibly well-researched book about Central State in Milledgeville, Central State institution, which at one point was the largest mental institution in the world. I first saw Mab talk about this in 2008 at the Barry Southern Women Writers Conference. And So you can see she's been working on this. This is a product of over a decade's worth of research. And it's not just about Central State, but it's about the history of mental illness in this country and the history of incarceration in this country and institutionalization, and thinking about confinement and trauma is a theme that really resonates in this book, and I've been thinking a lot about in reading The Enduring Chill. A still heartbreaking, not as heartbreaking book I also want to recommend is Carter Sickles' The Prettiest Star. This is new a couple months ago from Hub City Press. And Irene, I'll be happy to give you the information about these books. It's a novel by Carter Sickles. It's set in 1986, southeastern Ohio, northern Appalachia, about a young man who escaped his rural upbringing for a life of an artist in New York City, a life out of the closet in New York City. But as you might guess from it being set in 1986, he comes home to southeastern rural Ohio to die. And it's a really heartbreaking story, but also I was thinking about both The Prettiest Star and The Enduring Chill are about young men who escape their confining upbringings and return home, who feel the need to have their families see their sickness, who feel like it's part of their anger to kind of want to be seen, to have their trauma be seen by their families. So this, and you might, some of you might recognize the title, The Prettiest Star, is a David Bowie reference, and there's a lot of David Bowie references throughout, which is another reason why I enjoy it. But so that I asked Carter Sickles about it on Twitter this week, and he said, I haven't read The Enduring Chill. So I'm like, well, go read The Enduring Chill and tell me what you think of it. Because the similarities, there are a lot of really interesting thematic similarities. And then the other book that I've been thinking about is Carol Anderson's White Rage. Professor Anderson is a professor at Emory, and I've seen her talk, and I've read a lot of her work. That book is from 2016. But what I've been thinking about her book in terms of The Enduring Chill is that's a history of backlash to civil rights advancements in America. It's something I really admire about Dr. Anderson's work is she writes really clearly, and for academic works, it's particularly readable. And her focus is on the importance of clarity. And in fact, she argues that it's been a failure of clarity that has led to a failure of humanity with regards to civil rights in America. And the example she starts with is if Lincoln had been clearer in his discussion of what the causes of the Civil War were, it would have averted a lot of issues. And so this connection between clarity and humanity is something else that I want to touch on in The Enduring Chill. And the other book that I don't have, it just came out Tuesday. I've ordered it and I haven't read it yet, but there's a brand new book called Radical Ambivalence, Race and Flannery O'Connor that's out from Fordham University Press by Angela O'Donnell. And it's the first book-length treatment of race in O'Connor's work. So I heard some people talking about it in a panel last night, and I'm really looking forward to reading that. So those are just the books that are influencing my thinking about The Enduring Chill. So I think that O'Connor would share Dr. Anderson's assessment that clarity in vision and expression is critical for us to retain our humanity. This is kind of a theme that I keep thinking about in this story, is the relationship between clarity and humanity. And I was thinking about some of y'all may be familiar with Alice Walker's essays about Flannery O'Connor. Beyond the Peacock is one of them. That what she appreciates about O'Connor's work is Alice Walker is from Eatonville, right, just down the road from Milledgeville, and she's written about her appreciation for O'Connor's work, and she likes it because it doesn't have a whiff of the magnolia in it, right? Walker appreciates O'Connor's work because she says that she kind of addresses things straight on. And as I was thinking about all of this, I went back to, some of you may be familiar with, there's another book by the O'Connor scholar Ralph Woods who wrote the book, The Christ Haunted South. And he said that it's not clear, that we don't know if Flannery O'Connor read Martin Luther King's 1963 letter from a Birmingham jail, but there certainly are resonances between her disdain for the white moderate approach to civil rights and King's. And The Enduring Chill is she first wrote in 1958. But I wanted to start off by reading this bit about from Letter from a Birmingham Jail, because I think that this is on my long list of questions for Flannery O'Connor. This is up there with, what do you think of this, Flannery? So this was written in 1963 by King. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the White Citizens Council or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal that you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. And I was thinking about that, thinking about Asbury in this story and his desire to write about the Negro condition, this kind of vague term that he talks about. So again, King wrote that in 1963. The Enduring Chill, O'Connor first wrote in 1958 and published it in Harper's Bazaar in 1958. But then it's also the fourth story in Everything That Rises Must Converge, her second collection of short stories, which was published posthumously in 1964. And I think that The Enduring Chill and probably the more frequently read Everything That Rises Must Converge have some interesting parallels when you think about Julian and his kind of performative white progressivism, and Asbury in The Enduring Chill. And I think that they both kind of embody the kind of liberal white moderate that King is talking about. So hopefully you're all familiar to some extent with the story, but just to bring us all up to speed, the story opens with 25-year-old Asbury being met at the train in his hometown of Timberboro by his 60-year-old mother, Mrs. Fox, who was shocked by how sick he appears, and he gets a similar response from his sister. And one of the things that people talk about this story is how much it reflects O'Connor's own experience of illness. And in fact, in Brad Gooch's biography of O'Connor, when he talks about her return home, she graduated from Iowa from graduate school. She'd gone and was living with her friends, the Fitzgeralds in Connecticut, and spending her time there writing and taking care of their kids. And then for a couple of, at least a year, she was complaining about some pain. Her arms, there's this really heartbreaking letter to write where she talks about, she thinks that she's just typing too much, that her arms are too heavy to lift. She had just retyped the entire manuscript of Wise Blood, so she thought, I just typed too much. And she was at first diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. But she did eventually come home to Milledgeville, she came home too and got off the train in Atlanta and was met at the train by her Uncle Lewis. And the descriptions of Asbury in the story of seeing the look on his mother's face and seeing her shock at how changed he was seems to be very much based on her own experience of getting off the train and seeing her Uncle Lewis, who he later said that when he saw her, she resembled a shriveled old woman. And so from the very beginning with this Asbury seeing his mother's shock at his appearance, we're kind of set up for a theme of transformation, and transformation in relationship to other people. Right, we see the shocked look on Mrs. Fox's face when she sees Asbury. And there's also this feeling that we can really only see ourselves through the responses of other people. So transformation, but transformation as it has to do with other people and how our vision is mediated by other people. We can even see this in Asbury's complaints that his imagination is blocked because of his mother, that he has no inner vision because of his mother's. Again, even though he wrote 2 notebooks full of complaints about this, I don't know that we get a very clear idea of what exactly it is that his mother did to block his inner vision like this. So the story, he comes home with this illness, and then we get a flashback that a year ago he had come home. He was writing a play, and in the story says he was writing a play about Negroes, and then his mother says why anybody would want to write a play about Negroes was beyond her. And he had said that he wanted to work in the dairy with them and find out what their interests were. So they put up with him, and he'd learned to put the milkers on, and once he had washed all the cans, and once he had mixed feed, and then the cow had kicked him, and he never went back again. So not an incredible commitment to his research. He washes cans once, he mixes feed once, and then he gets kicked by a cow. He'd said that he wanted to be around them for a while to see how they really felt about their condition. But notice again, he doesn't define what this condition is. And it's this lack of clarity, this refusal to kind of define or define what you're seeing. This lack of clarity that gets in the way of our humanity. I think we see this here. And I'd love to be able to press Asbury on just what the condition of Morgan and Randall, the 2 Black men who work on the farm, what is this condition that he wants to learn about, right? Is it their reaction to the danger of their Jim Crow South? Is it their treatment on the farm? Is it their lack of autonomy in their lives? You know, all of these things could be a condition that he was wanting to talk to them about. But again, we see this lack of clarity in Asbury that I think is part of what's blocking his vision. So then after 2 days of working side by side with him, he felt he had not established rapport. And I love, as in all of her stories, the narrator in this story does such a great job of just kind of dryly reporting the action and letting us interpret, oh, 2 days. So he fed them, he cleaned some things, he worked 2 days, and then he thinks he knows. He's expected to have established a rapport with them. Again, another vague thing, right? This establishing rapport with these workers. And so in an attempt to forge some sort of relationship with them, the first thing he does is he offers them cigarettes in the barn, which they say that's against the rules. But they do take the cigarettes and smoke them, which Asbury interprets, again, this narrative I love. The narrator just says, one of those moments of communion when the differences between black and white is absorbed into nothing. So again, this is Asbury's assessment of, he asked these 2 Black men who work on his mother's farm to break the rules and smoke, that we later find out, right, there's a real reason for why you shouldn't smoke in the dairy barn. First, it destroys the milk, right? The milk ends up smelling like smoke. They can't sell the milk. And secondly, just the realities of you should not smoke in a barn, right? Smoking in a barn is very dangerous. But to Asbury, there's such a wonderful irony in this delivery, right? In 1958 Georgia, that Asbury could think that the differences between black and white could be absorbed into nothing, again, shows his cluelessness. So we get that. He offers them the cigarettes. He puts them in a really difficult position, right? That are you going to break the rules of your white employer who is not present, or are you going to do the dangerous thing that the white man standing in front of you is telling you to do? They choose in this situation to smoke cigarettes. But then he tries to get them to drink unpasteurized milk. That, again, we later find out that the real danger of drinking unpasteurized milk is that it can cause disease. But he, again, Randall tells them that Mrs. Fox doesn't allow it. Again, it's a lack of clarity. It's a lack of actually seeing what's going on, because Asbury thinks that it's a racism issue, right? That the rule is because they shouldn't be drinking out of the same cup. But it's actually because it's physically dangerous to do. It's interesting to me that Morgan and Randall are willing to smoke the cigarettes, but they draw the line at threatening their health. So I think Morgan and Randall showing the difference between potential danger to property versus potential danger to body and health is an interesting distinction that's made in this story. But as we find out, Asbury then does develop undulant fever, which those of you who maybe teach this maybe have looked this up or who are familiar with dairy farming. But undulant fever is a bacterial disease that's from drinking, that's transferred from animals to people, usually through drinking unpasteurized milk. Nowadays, we can be treated with antibiotics, although even treatment with antibiotics now, it usually does recur. So the symptoms of undulant fever are fever, weakness, headache, muscle pain, back pain. And I think it's really interesting that the symptoms of this disease so echo those of lupus and the rheumatoid arthritis that Flannery was originally diagnosed with. And it's called undulant fever because it rises and falls like a wave. These are symptoms that will come and then go and come and go and undulate like waves pretty much for the rest of your life. And like I said, even today, it can be treated with antibiotics, but it does tend to relapse. So before the diagnosis, for most of the story, Asbury and his family and we all think he's actually going to die. He's left behind a 2-volume letter of complaint to his mother, and upon his death, he will deprive the world of the art that he would have made if he had lived. But he'd written this angry letter complaining about how his mother had destroyed his life with the hope of the enduring chill that he hoped his death and accusatory writing would have on his mother. And this is where we get the title of the story. The letter would leave her with an enduring chill and perhaps in time lead her to see herself as she was. But instead, it's Asbury who's left with the literal enduring chill, right? He's left with this literal disease that is fever and chill. And maybe the hope that in time his enduring chill might lead him to see himself as he was. And again, this we're left with this, what I see as this theme of the importance of clarity of vision in order to be fully human. So that's the story. Like I said, much of the disease description and illness description is based on O'Connor's own experience of her own illness. But the character of Asbury is also very much influenced by her friendship with Mariette Lee, who some of you may be familiar with her friendship with Mariette Lee, whose brother became president of the college while she lived there. Mariette Lee was a playwright who lived in New York City, and she'd written a play about the South that had been performed in Harlem by an all-Black cast, so we get the kind of foundations of Asbury's play about the Negro in the South. And there's a pretty well-known story about when she had gone to visit Flannery at the farm and was going back to Atlanta to fly home to New York City, and she had made it a point to tell them that she was driving back to Atlanta with the family of Emmett Jones, who was a gardener at the university who was Black, and that caused some it was a story that Flannery liked to tell, partly because it upset Regina so much. We get a lot of this, let's throw our progressive behavior in our conservative parents' face to upset them in both these stories of the fiction as well as their own lives. And then O'Connor first read the story out loud there was a reading group that met at Andalusia that she referred to as the Pseudo-Literary and Theological Gathering. That was a weekly reading group. It was organized by William Kirkland, who was the local Episcopal minister. And in fact, Mariette Lee read the draft of her play to this same group around the same time. But in Gooch's biography, he reports that Reverend Kirkland talks about when she read this play to them for the first time, and he remembered that when she read it, she played up the comic relationship between Asbury and his physician, and she really bore down with the special emphasis on his comment, "What's wrong with me goes way beyond Block," right? Block, the the physician. So I hope I've touched on this theme of seeing things as they are, and clarity of vision and clarity of humanity that I see in this story. The scene in the barn with the two men and with Randall and Morgan. And we see this too in the story about Asbury's friend Getz, his friend in New York City who goes to Japan and comes back spouting all about Buddhism. But again, when the narrator describes him, it says he had returned from Japan, quoting something or other, he said, and then he talks about bodhisattvas and leading creatures into nirvana. But again, we get this kind of vagueness of he's quoting something or other. And he's using this to convince Asbury that everything is an illusion, that life and death is an illusion. But again, we never get very much specificity. As opposed to Randall and Morgan on the farm, if you want to know about life and death not being an illusion, farm life is again kind of the place where we learn about the realities of life and death. And this is connected to kind of a current campaign I'm on right now to take the farm women in O'Connor's stories more seriously. Oftentimes characters like Mrs. Fox or in Good Country People or The Displaced Person, we see these farm women who are constantly complaining about money and danger and things and how difficult their lives are. But I think that, especially as this story shows, oftentimes their concerns have bases in reality, right? And in the archive at Emory, the letters that O'Connor wrote to her mother while she was in graduate school, there are a couple of letters that she wrote when Regina took over running Andalusia. And it's been really telling to me that O'Connor's letters, when she first gets the news, she says, are you sure this is a really huge responsibility? Are you sure you really want to take over running the farm? And we don't have Regina's side of the correspondence, but the next letter is, I was not saying that you're not up for it. I'm not saying that you're not capable of it. I'm just saying that it would increase your worries. And having read those letters has made me take women like Mrs. Fox more seriously. That Flannery did understand that running a farm is a significant undertaking. And for those of you who've been to Andalusia, I think one of the things that I find really important about Andalusia and taking students there is you really get the sense that this was a farm, right? This is a working dairy farm. And thinking about being Regina Klein O'Connor, being a woman in the 1950s, widowed, raising a bratty and then ill daughter who's suffering from the same thing you lost your husband to, and running a dairy farm in Milledgeville in the 50s. I really have a huge amount of respect for Regina herself, and then the women in these stories who certainly are modeled on her as well. So this is both O'Connor's life, and this is a story about confinement and place, both Asbury's confinement, but we can think of all of the characters in this story as being confined, right? Mrs. Fox, even the black men working on the farm are tied to this job in a certain way. And O'Connor herself wrote to her friend Betty Hester also about being sick, and she described being sick as being a kind of place. She said, sickness is a place more instructive than a long trip to Europe. And in this story, the enduring chill is a metaphor for a kind of self-knowledge through pain. So this is the point I'd like to open it up and see what y'all's thoughts are about this, kind of starting with this idea of self-knowledge through pain, right? The pain of confinement, a forced confinement with others, certainly, right? The mature thing right now that we should all be doing is taking this opportunity to practice our patience and learn more about ourselves in these difficult times. But I wonder what you all think about these themes in the story.
Yeah, I think Catherine has something. Let me open her up. Or do you want to open her up, Michael?
I opened myself up. Can you hear me?
Okay, good.
I want to thank you so much for that introduction and for all the references to the books and other things that, Monica, we can pursue. I was also thinking, and I'm not sure it's directly related to your comment about confinement and pain, but how hard O'Connor is, as a Catholic especially, on those who are not working hard enough at their religion, right? And I'm thinking, of course, of the section with the priest and how irritated Asbury and other characters in O'Connor get with someone who doesn't understand that belief and faith and salvation are hard. So I just wanted to make that observation.
That's yeah. Well, and it's kind of like a two-way annoyance, right? Because Asbury's going, this is hard, but the priest is going, but you're not doing the work. It's like they're both going, you're not doing the work, but they disagree about what that work is.
Exactly.
And you think too, I mean, this is partly because Flannery herself, right, had a very regimented work ethic, right? Getting up every day, mass every day, 4 hours of writing every day. That for those of us who were in fine health and not in a lot of pain every day, I don't get up and write 4 hours every day. If that, yeah, I think that's a great point about the significance of and disdain for not doing the work.
Yeah, Chan, and then Jason.
Am I unmuted?
Yep.
Okay. Monica was talking about his lack of humanity, or his not being fully human, Asbury, that is. And for those of us from Milledgeville, Mary Janice is down in the bottom of my screen. For those of us from Milledgeville, it's always interesting to know, to have a real person flash before your eye whose name was that of the character. So when I hear Asbury, I think of the Asbury who I knew in Milledgeville. But anyway, I'm not sure that I agree that she was not, that he was not, it was his humanity. What struck me with this story, because we just read Good Country People, was that these intellectuals, as Flannery called them, from New York, were rather adolescent. They came home to their mothers and they became troublesome adolescents. So I see his problem as being, for all his education, and also Hulga, undeveloped human beings. They have thought deeply in one, or maybe not. Maybe they've just been good students and they've been able to pass all their exams, but they're not in touch either with themselves or with what's around them, and their behavior is just inexcusably immature. And when one of the men says his mama didn't whoop him enough, I see that. I also had a friend in Georgia who was very close to Flannery and used to spend a lot of time with her, and she helped him in his writing. And he once made the comment to me, sort of, I don't even remember the discussion, I just remember the comment about Southern women fall out of love with their husbands and fall in love with their sons. And I was thinking of that when I was reading this story about getting Asbury back under her wing. And Julian also in Everything That Rises. So I see it as lack of maturity rather than lack of being a human being.
Well, I think it's like the narcissism of like a 3-year-old, right? It is that like undeveloped, this lack of human development. And it's a good point about mothers and sons. I was trying to think last night what married couples we have in O'Connor's work. We have the parents in the river. There aren't married couples.
There's a lot of anomalies here because you don't often have siblings in her work either. Yeah.
I think that's a great point about the undeveloped, and I'm really stuck now on this idea of the difference between learning and just being able to pass your tests. I think that really relates interestingly to what Catherine said about doing the work.
Right.
So maybe this connection that y'all two are making about you have to do the work. and what work. Well, we see Asbury's commitment to doing work is 2 days tops.
Jason?
Thanks. So a couple of observations really briefly, and then I've got a question for you. I got a kick out of the story about Asbury getting kicked by the cow, because that sort of happened to me when I was a kid. I was at my grandfather's and he was teaching me to put the milker on the dairy cow that he had. And she didn't kick me, but she sort of bumped into me really hard. And I was about 10 at the time. And it was not a particularly pleasant experience. And I don't think I ever milked the cow again or wanted to milk the cow. So I can relate to him in that. And then also this idea of undulate fever. I grew up living with my great grandmother who had this unreasonable fear of undulate fever. I don't know why, but she was afraid that if we drank milk that had spoiled, we would get undulate fever. And so I sort of got a kick out of that too. Both of those stories sort of resonated with me on a personal. One thing that I noticed when I was reading this, and I'm in the middle of reading Brad Gooch's biography, and I actually just read the section where Flannery's friend, Miss Fitzgerald, and I can't remember her first name right now, reveals to her that it's lupus. It's not rheumatoid arthritis. And it really is heartbreaking. The way that he describes that experience between the two of them is heartbreaking. But Flannery seems so resolute and so okay with it in the way that he writes about it. And Asbury sort of seems okay with his lot too, but also there is in his character, I think, a desperation to sort of make sense of not only his plight, but sort of the whole world and everything that's going along with it. And that desperation seems to in a lot of her stories, even her earlier stories before she became ill. And I'm just wondering, am I just making that up in my head, or do other people notice that? And B, where does that sort of desperation come from for her, being that I see it in other characters before she got ill? It can't be all about her illness. Was it her father, or was it her relationship with her mother, which was not necessarily bad, but seemed a little strained at some points? I'm just curious about that sense of desperation.
Well, that's a great question. I also, Lee Smith's Oral History has a subplot that involves undulate fever as well. So if you want to read more cow stories, just personally, I really like that identification of this desperation feeling in these characters. I'm even thinking about, even you're right, even in Wise Blood, there is a sense of desperation. I wonder if it's related. I'm going to keep coming back to Catherine's point about the work ethic. That there's this, it may be more than just kind of overachieving woman in America syndrome. If I can just work hard enough or make the right list or, come up with get the right planner, everything will be fine. I will tell you, since, the beginning of the pandemic, I have made so many lists because it makes me feel like I have, some sort of, it gives me a feeling of control over something. So it may just be the desperation comes out in this kind of personality that just really thinks if everybody would just listen to what I say, everything would be fine. I think there's a great essay online about, for women who identify with Joy Helga, about this. And, I definitely see Joy Helga and Asbury as being cousins in some sort, literary cousins, if that's a term, of this just, none of y'all can see anything. I'm the one who can see everything. If you could just see the world the way that I do, everything would be fine. Right. So it's desperation, maybe partly frustration.
Mm. Yeah.
What do the rest of y'all think?
Well, I have a few other comments that people have, and then we'll go to Christine, had a comment to make, and then Catherine D., you wanted to say something? let me go to Christine first. Can you do that, Michael? It's easier if you do it.
Do you want me to say my comment? I don't.
Yeah, sure.
What I wrote. Hi, Monica. How are you?
Hey, Christine.
Wonderful. You know, the way you've talked about this story again and all the pieces you've brought in of her biography are so fantastic. So thank you so much. What was my comment? My comment is, you know, just listening to you talk really made me think for the first time about those two stories next to each other, Enduring Chill and Everything That Rises Must Converge. And that one story, like the more I think about it, it's almost like The Enduring Chill is a draft of Everything That Rises Must Converge. And I was sort of digging back through the dates. So it's not really a question, but there are really quite a number of similarities, especially if you're thinking about the issues of race and stuff. So, you know, I kind of don't have a question except have you thought about anymore? And it's just such an interesting, now I've got that in my head.
Especially this dynamic of the adult child who is trying to tick off their mom, you know. Here's another thing I was thinking about is one of the another really interesting thing to me about her letters to her mother that are in the Emory archive is you see a kind of evolution in her thinking about race. There's a letter from when she was in high school and her aunt took her to New York City, and she's just shocked that to eat in an integrated automat, and writes home about the first time she's eaten in an integrated restaurant. And then when she goes to Iowa, her first letters home have quite racist statements about her classmates and the dorm mates. But then there's some letters that she again is doing this kind of Asbury Julian thing where she reports the races of the people that she's eating lunch with, as a way to be like, hey mom, I'm eating in an integrated lunchroom, you know. And then there's later letters that Regina came to visit, and again, we don't have Regina's letters that, oh, how much we would love to read Regina's letters. But where apparently Regina had said something about the fact that they ate lunch with her classmates her black classmates and her white classmates. And she was, again, with this kind of, well, Regina, I don't, you know, and basically telling her, this is the way things are. You can't tell me what to do. I'm going to eat with whomever I want to, and this is the right thing to do. So there is this kind of, as y'all point out, this kind of adolescent, immature, hey mom, I'm being progressive to tick you off, that I think there's a lot to think about there.
And her black characters are so wise. Totally know what's going on in both stories. So there's this really interesting perspective, kind of respect she's showing. Like they really are on to these people, you know, the white people, they're on to the white people. So, but thank you so much. This is fantastic.
Well, thanks, Christine.
All right. Catherine D. I think
Well,
you're open.
Thank you for admitting me. This is wonderful to find all these great ideas being expressed. And this is my first taste of Flannery O'Connor. So I can only come to it from sort of open the page for the first time. And I'm a farm girl from Wisconsin. So the dairy part I can relate to. And I really related to I hated the immature boy because he was so mean to his mom. I just kept looking for some way to like him. It was really hard. But then I had to think about it because I went out, like all of us do, to, go to the world, become an artist of some sort. And when I got scared of taking risks, I would go back into, well, what was it that my mother did that makes me so afraid of this? And I think that's kind of a universal thing. I think anybody who takes a risk in any artistic environment, it's risky business. You feel like a failure sometimes, even when you're not. Maybe you really are. You don't know, am I really a failure, or am I just, and I kind of felt those, I felt a sympathy for his mother who said something, well, you can write your books upstairs in the morning and then you can go to the dairy in the afternoon. And I felt that she was the most loving of all the characters. And
The sister was intolerable also, but funny almost. And so anyway, I'm enjoying the characters, and I don't have too much brilliant to say, but thank you for letting me come. Yeah.
Oh no, we're really glad to have you. That's really interesting to think about. I mean, there are very few likable characters in any of her works. I'll just warn you right now. But there is, as somebody who came to her work when I was like 19, I did tend to identify with those angry adolescent artist types because, you know, I was doing that myself. And it is interesting to see how my sympathies change and evolve over the past 20 years or 30 years. I can't do math. 30 years that I've been reading her work.
We have Victoria next, then Amy, then George.
Am I?
You're on.
I was so fascinated by the undulant stuff that I started looking up everything about it on the FDA website. And it seems that there still are about 100 cases, human cases, a year, even now. And they're mostly from people who drink unpasteurized milk. But also, it seems that in 1956, almost every herd, or thousands and thousands of herds across America had cases of brucellosis, of what he called bashes. The doctor called bashes. And what I started wondering is, was this lady supposed to be selling milk that came from a herd? You know, the herds were divided into the milk herd and the dry, I think they were called, the dry herd. And I've got to assume that the dry herd were, because it causes them to abort spontaneously, and so they don't produce milk. But was it okay?
I can speak to that. But,
Please do.
Oh, please. Now, in 1956, they started trying to wipe it out. The government.
Well, in terms of dairy husbandry, I worked on a dairy farm when I was a teenager. And dry cows are just the cows who've run out of milk and they either have been bred already or you're waiting for them to give birth. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
Okay.
People still drink what they call raw milk all the time. I was in Pennsylvania before this, and some of the Amish farmers would sell raw milk from their houses. And when we work on the dairy farm, there were people who would come to our house. You know, we're supposed to do it, obviously, but we would sell raw milk because people think of it as having a health benefit aside, I guess, from the brucellosis.
Also, you can make clotted cream from unpasteurized milk, and you can't from ultra-pasteurized.
The FDA has 3 very moving videos to watch if you're ever tempted to drink unpasteurized milk.
I read enough Southern literature that I am completely terrified of. Between this and Lee Smith, I will never try even the not ultra-pasteurized milk.
Thanks.
Thanks, Victoria. Amy?
All right, Amy, I just sent a request to unmute you. I think you win the award for furthest distance for joining us, I think.
Yeah,
is that right?
Yeah, I'm in Istanbul, Turkey, yeah. Yeah, so I managed to stay awake, and here I am.
Good for you.
And I'm glad I did. So, yeah, Thank you for having me. Yeah, this is just been so wonderful, and thank you, Monica, for the introduction. And you really, I think, I've taken quite a few notes already, but one point in particular, this whole idea of the white moderate was something that a connection I hadn't made. And actually, one thing that I was going to say that I connect with is, so I'm from Southern Ohio originally, so just like half an hour south of Columbus, so quite rural. And I left home at 16 and came to Turkey, and then I went to Bryn Mawr College just outside of Philadelphia, and then I came back to Istanbul. So I basically never lived there since I was 16. But I go back about every year. And so I remember even the first time I read this story, the most striking thing for me was this kind of urban-rural divide, and the idea of going back to this rural, home place. And the longer I've been away, I mean, so I always feel like I'm in this kind of in-between space, because I work in publishing, which and interact a lot with kind of the New York publishing sphere in particular and all that. And going to Bryn Mawr, for example, and I went from being in this very rural community to being a part of what we call the white liberals, the whole that whole framework. And I kind of live in it. I mean, I'm in Istanbul, but my interactions with the publishing community are basically, I think, a lot of white moderates. Now, going off your description, a lot of very well-meaning people, but just from a very urban and very specific background. And they're also, so one thing, I'm going to get this into a question in a way, because I'm just thinking about what we're experiencing right now, even with the rebellions and everything, is this kind of divide, which is not just a Republican Democrat divide, but you can totally see it in this kind of rural urban framework. And so what I found just very fascinating about the story is this kind of disdain that Asbury has, when he goes back home, and even that scene when he's coming out, what does he say? Imagines the roofs, the roofs of these houses is something, the buildings is something else, and he's quick. Then he's kind of, even, I don't know what you say, makes fun of himself for imagining that this
Right.
dreadful place could be worth anything or something. But I just thought, I don't know, that it for me, it kind of resonates even for this moment, because it's almost a reflection on, kind of maybe an earlier reflection on the same divide that's kind of dividing us now. So there's this idea of the disdain for the rural ignorant, right? That's what he's always saying. You don't understand me. You're too stupid. He's always putting these other people down. And we don't know if he was doing that before he went off. Probably.
I assume he was.
Yeah, we assume he was, but now he's probably even worse. I don't know. But yeah, anyways, I don't know.
Yeah, I love I noticed too the rural-urban divide, and because this was something that I think O'Connor felt a lot of frustration about, that she said that in terms of the rural-urban divide, like this Tuesday, there was a 50-person demonstration in Dublin, Georgia, population 16,000, that these are the sort, and we had an 800-person march in Macon, Georgia, that was coordinated by the sheriff's department here. But these smaller stories often get overlooked in the larger urban stories. And I love there's so many details in this story about, one thing I was thinking about the rural-urban divide in this story is with regard to, and this may seem to come out of nowhere, but regard to the concept of vulnerability. There's that great scene in the beginning where he's in his freezing apartment in New York City, and he's got 3 layers of the New York Times to try to keep himself warm with, and then even 3 layers in the New York Times won't keep him warm. And there's that similar thing where he's disdainful about the Timberboro doctors, and he's like, if I wanted a doctor, I would have gone to a New York City doctor, right? And his mother says, but you want a doctor who has a personal connection to you. So again, it's that theme that I keep harping on about clarity of vision, but it's also, again, the small town doctor knows him, probably knows, maybe had it in his head, that knows he's in a dairy farm, knows he might have done something like this, where a New York City doctor, undulant fever probably would not have been something that would have been at the top of the New York City doctor's diagnosis ideas. So yeah, I think she's doing something really interesting with the rural-urban divide here. And as she does with everything, shows that it's like way more complicated than we like to think of it.
Now I think we have George and then Chan, and that might be close to wrapping it up, but we'll see. Oh, and Linda. George, Chan, and Linda.
Yes, I guess there are a number of things that have been said that are pretty provocative to me. One, I think that Monica was talking about Mrs. Fox and running the farm. And that was kind of reminiscent for me of a story we did a couple of meetings ago on the displaced person, Mrs. McIntyre, who's also running the farm, and what a real responsibility that was. But then there's the whole work issue and the meaning of life issue that's sort of woven into the sectional issue, north and south. The Northerners are sort of diehard Lockeans, where work and the work ethic is at the center of life and the meaning of life. The Southerners obviously radically less so, and certainly going back to antebellum times and the way in which the real men don't work, and so work is not at the center of the meaning of life. And so the question of what does give life meaning becomes central for them. And of course, with Asbury, this whole issue of him being an artist and sort of worshiping the god art is a central one. And so when he comes home, Mrs. Fox is thinking, oh, well, what he really needs to do is just do some work. Get out to the barn and milk some cows and all the rest of it. And this is, of course, the last thing that's going to give meaning to his life. So I just wonder how much of the story is not revolving around that issue, and just what happens to a person who somehow moves in that direction. I want to be an artist. I want to write a novel or something like that. But then that sort of requires production of some sort. And what is it that happens to a person who moves in that direction and then finds that it's a lot harder to write a decent novel than I thought. And of course, Mary George seems to be the person in the story who's trying to help us out. She says his problem is that he can't write, and so being unable to write, he's getting sick. But I just wonder about that question, and I'm sure Flannery O'Connor herself was blessed with real ability, but she couldn't help but know that was a real issue for many people around her.
It was a lot of work.
When you say, well, I don't really want to work for 50 years or 60 years and then retire. No, I wasn't born to work. No, I don't believe in the work ethic. Then what is your life supposed to center around in that case? No, and especially when you discover that you really don't have artistic talent.
Well, I think those are wonderful points, and I really love the distinctions you make between the regional understandings.
I'm having a lot of technical difficulties tonight, so
I really like
I can hear, but not very well what's being said. my
I really
my
like the
new
regional.
earphones are not doing so well.
Oh, let me try. I really like the regional connections you've made, but I was thinking too, we see a lot of Flannery working through her own thinking about the relationship between work and art, because she did see, right, people were just like, oh, isn't that cute that you're just a nice lady novelist, right? Why don't you just like go and write Gone with the Wind again, right? Which Asbury's mother says to him too. But her letters from graduate school, she's very clear to Regina that she needs to go to school to learn to write. There are things that she needs to do and to work to write. And she, like, before she comes home for the summer, she warns her mother, I'm going to be working every day. If I want to be a novelist, if I want to be an artist, it requires work. So in her, I love this, the points you make about the story, because I do think we see this working through what is the relationship between art and work. And certainly she had, as you say, the gift, but she also saw that it's something that you had to put the work into. It's interesting how work keeps coming up as a theme today.
Chin.
I was going to go back to Jason's point about desperation, because I think it's related to her Catholicism, but Linda hasn't talked, so let her talk.
Okay. Just a minute, Linda.
You have to confirm that you can unmute. I sent the request. You should be able to confirm it.
Okay, did that happen?
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay. I grew up in Middle Tennessee around a lot of dairy farms, even though I live in the Baltimore area now. And I've been reading Flannery O'Connor for a long time. And I've noticed that whenever Jesus Christ, God, is summoned in a passage, you're somewhere that Flannery wants you to notice. And there is an earlier story where somebody wants a child to get dressed properly, and they say, well, for Christ's sake, fix him. I forget which story that is, but they're about to leave the house, and there's that.
Might be the river, maybe.
I'm not sure, but
it probably happens a lot.
It probably happens a lot, and it happened in this book, this story, when they're turning in the driveway to the farm. And this struck me, it was very poignant when they have the dry cows and the other cows divided. And there's a little walleye jersey there that she and Asbury make eye contact, and it makes Asbury very uncomfortable. But the cow is saying there's a bond between us. And it really troubles Asbury. And he says to his mother, good God, can't we go on? And that is something that I want to use that old term, foreshadows what's coming to us at the end of this story. And one more little quick thing. I just got the book of Caroline Gordon and Flannery's letters between each other. And Caroline Gordon tells her right there at the first, you better let the reader know what's coming. And I think that this little walleye jersey is telling us it isn't going to bode well for Asbury, but we know it isn't anyway. But that's what I so admire about her artistry.
Yeah, and let me just quickly, another shout out, I don't have that book in here, but the author of that book, Christine Flanagan, is here right now. And that's another really insightful book. If you want to know about Flannery's writing and revising process, is the letters between her and the author, Caroline Gordon. Gordon was... I
really am enjoying it. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was quite, what we say, prescriptive in telling Flannery what to do in revising her stories. It's fascinating insights into the stories.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Linda. Sadly, Monica, we've gone past our hour, and it's been a great discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. And hopefully you can make next Tuesday. And then we'll have Bruce again in another 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, y'all.
Bye.